here. Recording in progress, and I see Reverend Ogo is on the line as always. Very good. All right, well, it's absolutely my pleasure to welcome each and every one of you, and I'm delighted because moving forward in this Order of Saint Benedict, you're going to find that it's less of an abbey. I mean, as we were out in rural country or something like that, and more of a diocesan-wide ministry where we're going to focus on six major areas. And that's going to be prayer, scripture, community service, building community, the Great Commission, and then the rule of St. Benedict applied in a 21st century context, because some of it applies in that 7th century document, but not everything applies. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to our featured speaker this evening, the Venerable Isaac Rehberg, and he is the rector of All Saints Anglican Church in San Antonio, Texas, a very dear friend of mine, and he is also the archdeacon for liturgy. So did I say that right, Father Isaac?
I believe so.
All right. Well, what I'm going to do
one
is
never knows for sure, but yes.
or liturgy officer, or and a lot of this, including in my case, sometimes you get assigned stuff whenever you ask questions. Is that true, Venerable?
That is absolutely true. Yes,
Why I'm a
it
canon.
happens.
So, all right. So with that, we're going to begin with an overview of the 1662 Fellowship of North America. And one thing I did ask Venerable Rehberg about is to describe what it is and why it's important. And we'll do that for about a half an hour. And then you're going to notice in the chat that I've included the liturgy for this evening, which is the 1662 evening prayer. So with that, over to you, Venerable.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. I have a bit of a presentation. This is kind of the long version of what I had planned for Synod. So let's pop that back up. I think that's the right one. Yes, that is the right one. Okay, here we go. All right. So yeah, I'm on a lot of committees. That's kind of what happens oftentimes in the diocese. And one of the committees that I'm part of is the Evangelism Task Force. And one of the things the Evangelism Task Force saw happening is that there is a renewed interest in some of our roots as Anglicans, and specifically some of our 16th and 17th century roots. All over the nation, this has been popping up more and more. And so the proposal in the Evangelism Task Force was that we would include some sort of way of equipping people in this and driving this sort of thing, which came to be known as the 1662 Fellowship of North America. And the bishop did ask me to kind of head that project. So this is part of our 5-year vision. So why did we think this is an important thing to include in the 5-year vision? Well, first of all, there's a lot of theological confusion in the church, period, but also even within, shall we say, Orthodox or conservative North American Anglicanism, where there's a lot of competing visions and they don't always line up with each other. And so we thought that one of the best ways to help curb this was to go back to some of our roots. You may recall that at the time of the Reformation, one of the things that was happening was this cry of ad fontes, back to the sources. So that's why our reformers started to learn Greek and Hebrew, something that had not been done in a long time, studying the actual texts of the church fathers, and not just relying on summary documents and things like that. Another word that kind of pops up as another movement is ressourcement. It's a French word, but it basically meant the same thing. And that's something that we saw later on. And right now we're kind of in a period where there's a lot of folks in this conservative Anglican world that are once again crying ad fontes and engaging in an Anglican ressourcement. But what we wanted to do in the fellowship is not just be antiquarian, not just basically try to turn the clock back 400 years or so. But we wanted to both respect our continuity with what's come before, but also respect the need for reform, reining in some of the hyper diversity that can happen even within otherwise orthodox Anglicanism. So why are we doing this? Well, what we're going to do is in the fellowship is promote our formularies as our theological center of gravity, and we'll talk about that, what that means in a little bit. We want to facilitate a fellowship that is across jurisdiction, across diocese, basically other folks that are interested in going back to our sources, kind of connect everybody together. So we're not all doing our own thing, but we can actually kind of work together in this. We want to use this as a way to educate the Anglican public, provide resources, or if resources are already out there, get those to people, so make a way for them to those resources to get there. And I'll talk about some of the ways we've begun to do that already. And then finally, we want to equip church planters and evangelists, those who are on the front lines of spreading the gospel and spreading the mission of the church, with some of these older resources that might indeed be very helpful. So what do we mean by the theological center of gravity? So again, the purpose is not to turn things back to the 17th century or to the 15th or the 16th century rather, but it's so that those original formularies, those core documents and core ideas from our founding can kind of keep us all in the same orbit. You see here, there's a chart illustrating the way centripetal force works and orbits work. And basically, from physics, what happens is the force is moving towards the center, but the body is trying to go a certain way. But because that force is keeping you around the center, you're actually circling it and not going off into outer space. Basically, we're not going off in weird directions, and we really believe that our formularies from the 16th and 17th century can be that theological center of gravity that keeps us from going off into weird directions. And frankly, we have seen that, haven't we, in the last 50 to 100 years, where our communion is broken because we have not maintained a theological center of gravity. And so what are those formularies? Well, first of all, we have the classical Book of Common Prayer, which really reaches its zenith in the 1662 edition. And that doesn't mean there hasn't been other developments since then, but that really that gold standard is the 1662. And we find that in the Anglican Church in North America's fundamental declarations, as well as the GAFCON Jerusalem Declaration acknowledges this, that really is our gold standard liturgically. That doesn't mean everybody needs to pick up a 1662 for their worship, but that does mean that that's our gold standard for our theology of worship and our theology of liturgy. The 39 Articles of Religion. That really is, I'm going to use a bad word here, our confessional document as Anglicans. A lot of people want to say, we're not like other Protestants. We don't have confessions. Actually, the 39 Articles are a confession. They might be a little bit different from some of the other ones, but they are our confessional document. And it really wasn't until the middle of the last century that clergy were allowed to depart from the 39 Articles. Even in the United States, where there was never full subscription in assenting to the doctrine of the church, in those core doctrines, the 39 Articles were the backbone. So our 39 Articles of Religion. Now, those can be interpreted in some different ways, and I think that was intentional on the part of our reformers. Unlike some of the other branches of the Reformation, we were always a little bit of a big tent. Some of that was political expediency. Some of that was being a wide national church. But we did have enough room in the Articles to accompany or to accommodate just basic Protestant orthodoxy. We didn't have to necessarily take a stance in some of the the more scholastic arguments of the later days. Our historic ordinal. Our ordinal is the way that we ordain. It's the liturgy we use for ordaining, but it also tells us what we believe about the ordained ministry. So those are our core formularies in our tradition, and we need to be looking back at those to keep us in the right place theologically. And we would also want to supplement these by the two books of homilies and the writings of the early English divines. If you're not familiar with them, the two books of homilies are the official set of sermons that were to be read. The first book was published during the reign of Edward VI, the second during the reign of Elizabeth I. The first one was largely written by Thomas Cranmer, but with some of the other bishops at the time, kind of that first generation of English reformers. And the second book of homilies, we're pretty sure Bishop John Jewel wrote most of those, and he was kind of the leading fellow in that second or third generation of Anglican divines. But we'd also want to supplement this with the other writings of the early English divines. I mentioned Bishop Jewel. His apology for the Church of England was almost, for a long time, had a similar status to the formularies. It was that highly regarded. Richard Hooker's Laws of Ecclesiastical Polity, Thomas Cranmer's big tome on the sacraments. All of these early English divines can really help us out. And what do we mean by the early period? I'd probably say anything from the time of the Reformation proper, so that mid 16th century, until about the middle of the 17th century, that the Restoration period after the English Civil War, when the 1662 Book of Common Prayer becomes official. That whole reign of stuff is really the things that help us understand what our reformers meant when they were putting together these documents. And so they should have a special place. That doesn't mean we have to agree with any of those things, especially those supplemental things. We don't necessarily have to agree, but we really ought to know what they say, because our tradition does have a coherent theology. It's not what anything goes, the way that it's often been portrayed. It's not Catholic light or Presbyterians with a prayer book. We're not either one of those things, right? We actually have a coherent system, and we'll only know that by really digging into those writings, our formularies and those writings of the 16th and 17th century. So what we want to do is see our formularies as the theological lens for the way we're doing ministry, the way we're doing our liturgy, the way we're doing our worship. So we do want to respect that we do have legitimate liturgical diversity in the diocese and in the province. But as we look at these later liturgies, let's do so through the lens of the theology of our 1662 Book of Common Prayer. An example of this might be, this is more practicum than theology, but during the pandemic, when we weren't able to do communion every Sunday, some of us revived the idea of the anti-communion service, so morning prayer plus the liturgy of the word. But how do you do that liturgy of the word? Well, a lot of our later prayer books are a little vague on it. Our parish uses the 1928, which is a lot closer to the 1662. But even in the 1928, how you do anti-communion, it's there, but it's kind of fuzzy on what that looks like. Well, I went to the 1662 and saw kind of where some things had been shuffled around that I could use in the 20. They were shuffled around for the 28, but they were still there. So I was able to do a very robust anti-communion during the pandemic or other times like that. But another one is we do want to see that our articles and our liturgy and our ordinal in the classical sense do say something theologically, and we need to be saying the same thing when we're doing our liturgies with these more modern ones, those that are using later and more modern liturgies. We also want to support ethnic diversity and the linguistic diversity that we do have in the diocese. One of the benefits of the 1662 Book of Common Prayer was that it did go with the British Empire to all these other lands. And so it's been translated in dozens of languages and been used in many, many countries. When I was just a postulant, I was delighted to discover a 19th century translation of the 1662 into Hebrew as part of their mission to the Jewish people at the time. And they even used for matins, they used the Jewish Sidur's term shachrit, and for evensong, mincha, which are the morning and evening services but they were basically saying, look, we have this beautiful Christian resource that is doing the same thing that your Siddur is doing, but it's all about Jesus. And that was just beautiful to me. But we also want to use our formularies for supplemental education. Teaching folks how to look at what we're doing in a modern context with that theology of our reformers and our early divines, because that really is the vision of why we became a Church of the Reformation in the first place. So that's the formularies as our theological lens. But we also want to facilitate fellowship. We want to equip mission. We want this to be cross-diocesan, cross-jurisdictional. Do this education in a multimedia fashion. This is still developing at this point. We've got a Facebook page that's been putting resources out there, but we're gonna build to doing some videos in the new year and get a website eventually as well. Website, social media resources, and one of the particular passions of Bishop Seeley and Venerable Cerebrov, who's our chancellor, is getting some of those historical musical adaptations that were used in those days. I don't know how that's going, but I'm told that Bishop Seeley has told me that he's having a lot of fun. He was the last church music major at Texas Lutheran University in Seguin, the very last one that was that when they had the program. So this is going back to his wheelhouse. So we're working on some of those things, but all of that at this point is very much in development. The point, however, is that we do want to have a genuine fellowship built with this, using our social media to do that, using in-person things, using things like tonight's presentation with the Order of St. Benedict. If you wanted to get started, here are some really kind of essential resources. I would recommend for your edition of the 1662, getting that international edition from InterVarsity Press. This has been an absolute boon to this Ad Fontes and Ressourcement project that's been going on. I intend on, in some of the early videos, YouTube videos we do, doing an interview with a couple of rectors in the ACNA who are using the 1662 in their church plants. Some guys who've already been doing a lot of podcasting on their own, actually. That's my intention anyway. But the reason why I would advise the international edition of the 1662 is that it is a little bit easier to navigate than something you might buy from Oxford University Press, the way they're using it in England. It does preserve the original lectionary from 1662, which is by far my favorite of the daily office lectionaries, and we can talk about why in a little bit on that. It includes the homily on justification as an appendix, plus some ways that it can be adapted for a non-British setting. So it's a really good addition. I dare say many of our clergy have never read through the books of homilies, and there are some options for that. Lee Gaddis has done a modernization of the first book, so it breaks some of those language barriers. Lee Gaddis, a friend of our bishop. Gerald Bray, he's done a critical edition of the homilies with a lot of scholarly notes, and I think his actually also includes not just the two books of homilies, but if I remember properly, it includes a counter-Reformation set of homilies that were published during the time of Mary Tudor. So it's a makes for an interesting contrast there. But there's a lot of really good scholarly notes there. And then finally, the edition that I have is the John Griffiths edition that was originally published, late 1800s. It's public domain, so you can get reprints of that pretty easily, or even find it online through things like the Internet Archive, things like that. That's as far as I have is in terms of the slides themselves. So I'm going to end the screen share, get back to actual video here. But yeah, I one of the things, the reason why this ad fontes approach is so important to me and to many others is that the vision of our reformers was highly scriptural. More than anything else, they wanted to get the Bible into our people and do it in a way that was consistent with the way that the church had always done things, yet purged from some of those medieval abuses. And so, I do think that, unfortunately, as we've edited things in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, we've moved away from that vision in some very unfortunate ways. But going back to the sources can really help. We've got about 8 minutes before we need to go into the evening prayer portion, but I'd like to open it up if anybody has questions, comments, anything I might be able to answer about the 1662 Fellowship.
Well, two things. One thing I want to point out to those who are just joining the Zoom is that if you look in the chat, you will find the liturgy for evening prayer for this evening, complete with the readings. And secondly, if Venerable Rehberg, if you have a link to your Facebook page available, if you could place that in the chat, that would be wonderful.
I don't on this device, unfortunately.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to look it up and I will
Thank
post
you.
it because I've already followed your page. So I'll open up the floor for any questions that y'all might have. Over to the audience.
Oh, Mark here, Panama. I had a question. What is your page, Archdeacon?
On the Facebook page?
Right.
Yeah, it's the Facebook page is the 1662 Fellowship of North America. Okay. And Father Barry's going to put that in the chat here. He's going to look that up and get that paste there. And what we've been doing with that right now is basically every day or so, I've been sharing, or the other folks have been sharing, maybe a reflection on some of the aspects of these formularies. I've been sharing some of the homilies as they've been reprinted by the North American Anglican. I'm on the editorial board there, so they're very excited about this project. Some commentaries, reliable commentaries on the 39 articles, things like that. And so I've been very happy to beg, borrow, and steal in a very ethical way from other folks who have been making these types of resources available already.
Excellent.
Okay, I just joined. I just liked it.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Mark.
No, excellent. And for everybody's benefit, I did place the link to the 1662 Fellowship Facebook page if you would like to follow that page. And that was a great presentation, Venerable. And just for the sake of clarity, if you were thinking about maybe a 5-year vision, what do you hope to accomplish in a nutshell over the next 5 years in our diocese with this?
The big thing I would like to see is our folks really engaging with our formularies. I want our folks to know the articles of religion, to be using the articles of religion in their catechizing, in their preaching, to be familiar with the books of homilies. If nothing else, for our clergy to have used them devotionally, maybe during Lent or something like that, to be able to be conversant enough with our early divines, but especially those those formularies, that they do show up in our teaching, preaching, catechizing, so that we aren't moving away from that center of gravity. We're not going off in weird directions. We're not I would like to see some of our people maybe go to Anglican sources for their first one rather than Roman Catholic or generic evangelical ones, and that's a problem. We all have our hobby horses, but we really ought to. And that doesn't mean we need to ignore those other folks, but let's be rooted in our own tradition, because it is coherent and it has something to say.
Excellent. And all the more reason why I would like to see more catechists. We actually have a catechist from St. Benedict Anglican Church. John is also on this call this evening. So my hope is that we can invite more catechists to participate, especially the catechists that are blazing the trail into church planting, because I really see this 1662 fellowship as a means for evangelism. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there is a simplicity to the way that our forebears did things, which makes for in an increasingly de-churched or unchurched society, that can make things a little bit easier. For example, the 1662 Book of Common Prayer just has so fewer options. And as a priest who likes to do things with liturgy, that's going to drive me nuts, because I kind of want to play around and experiment. Don't play around and experiment.
Right.
Keep it straightforward, because your people need that, and they will learn it better when things are straightforward. So, and that's one of the things we can learn from that, even if we're not using those older forms, is let's keep things as straightforward as possible, because that'll help our people learn it.
Well, that sounds very familiar to how you trained me when I was a deacon looking at the priesthood. So I definitely, the one thing that you always reminded me to do is to stick to the script. That is the rubrics, because that actually protects the congregation from a celebrant with an imagination.
Yeah, and we all have the temptation to do that. I mean, it's we all want to experiment, and we really shouldn't. The congregation needs to be protected from us, and vice versa as well. We can point back to these things and say, no, I'm not going off of my own imagination, but this is actually here in black and white. This is what we believe, and that's also very helpful. It keeps controversy minimized, because we got the final word there in black and white, and it's not just the rector being a tyrant.
Amen to that. Well, before we segue into evening prayer, and as a reminder,